In the great sweep of history, nations rise, and sometimes they begin to unravel. What we are witnessing now, slowly and unmistakably, is a transformation long in the making. The collapse of Israel, not through the roar of a single event, but the tremors of multiple cracks spreading beneath its foundations, has officially begun. It begins within. Political unrest, once episodic, has become a drumbeat in Israeli society. Streets fill with chants of protest, not against a foreign invader, but against their own leaders. Judicial reforms once intended to protect governance now divide the nation at its core. The very idea of what Israel is, and should be, is no longer agreed upon, even among its own people. In recent months, the myth of military invincibility has been pierced. Sophisticated air defense systems, once seen as shields of divine protection, are now overwhelmed by barrages of rockets, precision drones, and coordinated incursions. Battles on multiple fronts are no longer rare, they are expected. The sense of security once felt from Haifa to Eilat is now fragile. Externally, Israel's alliances are straining. Traditional supporters in the West voice discomfort. Once vocal allies now offer only whispers. Their diplomats are growing colder, economic support wanes, cultural boycotts rise. In a world that values human rights and transparency, global opinion is turning. And when the outside world turns, isolation tightens. At the heart of Israel's survival has always been its intellect, its innovation. But even this engine shows signs of stalling. Startups are moving abroad. Investors are pausing. Scientists, students, and technologists, the minds that built a digital nation from desert, are quietly packing their bags, looking for stability elsewhere. A brain drain is not loud, but it is lethal. More than borders and bombs, however, it is the human threads that seem to fray the most. Between ultra-Orthodox and secular, between Arab and Jew, between Zionist and critic, trust is fading. Coexistence, already fragile, is cracking. A nation divided internally cannot stand indefinitely, no matter how tall its walls or loud its rhetoric. Beyond its borders, the pressure mounts. Resistance is no longer fragmented. It is coordinated, funded, and ideologically united. From Gaza to southern Lebanon, from Syria to Yemen, a belt of defiance is forming. These are not isolated groups, they are a movement, determined and growing bolder with every sign of Israeli vulnerability. And so, in the soft erosion of unity, in the dimming trust of allies, and in the steady beat of resistance from without and within, the evidence is all around us. Not dramatic, but decisive. Israel's collapse is not a single moment. It is a process, and it has already begun. The first keynote focuses on internal political fragmentation, a process that has significantly contributed to the instability within Israel. Over the past few years, Israel has experienced repeated political stalemates, with no single party able to maintain a clear majority in the Knesset, its parliament. This has led to a series of elections within short periods, eroding public trust in the political system. Coalition governments formed out of necessity rather than shared vision have struggled to maintain cohesion, often collapsing under ideological contradictions. The most notable friction has been between nationalist religious factions and centrist or liberal elements, which has deepened existing societal division. The recent judicial overhaul efforts have ignited mass protests and brought to the surface a civil divide that has long been simmering. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's push to limit the power of the judiciary sparked not only widespread demonstrations, but also fierce opposition from legal institutions, reservist military officers, and major business leaders. Critics argue that these reforms undermine democratic checks and balances, while supporters believe they are necessary to curb what they see as judicial overreach. The result is a society that no longer agrees on the basic rules of governance, law, and civil conduct. This fragmentation is not limited to political elites, but resonates across communities. Israel's ultra-Orthodox population, with its own education systems and limited participation in the workforce or military, stands increasingly apart from secular society. Settler movements on the West Bank operate with ideologies and agendas that challenge the state's own authority. Arab citizens of Israel continue to face systemic discrimination and alienation, with minimal representation and influence in national politics. These tensions are magnified by the media, which now reflects and amplifies ideological echo chambers rather than promoting unified narratives. Furthermore, younger generations in Israel are growing disillusioned with politics altogether. Polls indicate declining faith in institutions and increasing cynicism among the youth, especially regarding corruption, inequality, and the lack of prospects for peaceful coexistence. What once was a nation forged by collective purpose is now shaped by mutual suspicion and ideological battles. In such an environment, governance becomes reactive instead of proactive, fragmented instead of coordinated. The result is a nation that appears whole on the outside, but fractured from within, with political fragmentation threatening the very stability of the state. The second keynote addresses Israel's exposed military vulnerabilities, which have increasingly come to light through recent conflicts and regional escalations. Historically, Israel has been regarded as having one of the most advanced military forces in the Middle East, relying heavily on superior technology, intelligence, and rapid response capabilities. Systems such as the Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow missile defense network were believed to be impenetrable layers protecting Israeli territory from enemy rockets and missiles. However, recent attacks have started to reveal cracks in this perception of invincibility. The October 7th attack by Hamas was a pivotal moment that shook national and international confidence in Israeli military intelligence. The surprise assault from Gaza, involving coordinated ground breaches, drones and rocket fire, demonstrated a new level of operational sophistication among Israel's adversaries. It also indicated that the Israeli defense forces were unprepared for unconventional and multi-pronged offensives launched under the radar. The lapse in response time and the subsequent chaos it created show that Israel's defenses, once viewed as preemptive and omniscient, could be bypassed or overwhelmed under the right circumstances. Simultaneously, Israel faces rising threats from its northern border with Lebanon, where Hezbollah has grown in strength and military capability. Equipped with precision-guided missiles and increasingly sophisticated weaponry, Hezbollah poses a serious threat not only to Israel's northern cities, but to strategic infrastructure, including airports, water facilities, and energy centers. These weapons are dispersed across civilian areas, making them harder to target and neutralize. This has forced Israel into a defensive posture, unable to engage fully without risking international backlash or civilian casualties. Moreover, the emergence of drone warfare has significantly challenged Israel's conventional defense systems. Mass swarms of low-cost, high-impact drones have occasionally overwhelmed radar detection and response systems. Iran's support to proxies across the region has amplified these capabilities, allowing non-state actors to carry out increasingly complex and damaging operations with fewer resources. These asymmetrical tactics reduce Israel's technological edge and force a shift in its military doctrine, which traditionally relies on air superiority and rapid retaliatory strikes. The cumulative effect of these developments is a visible erosion of deterrence. Adversaries who once feared overwhelming Israeli retaliation now test its limits with growing frequency. From the skies of Gaza to the hills of Lebanon and the desert corridors of Syria, Israel finds itself defending on multiple fronts, often reacting rather than preventing, and revealing that its military dominance is no longer absolute. The third keynote focuses on Israel's growing international isolation, a trend that has accelerated in recent years due to shifts in global perception, changes in foreign policy dynamics, and heightened scrutiny over domestic and regional policies. For decades, Israel maintained strong diplomatic, military, and economic ties with Western powers, especially the United States and members of the European Union. These alliances were built on shared strategic interests, democratic values, and a mutual commitment to security in a volatile region. However, a steady erosion of these relationships is becoming increasingly apparent as both public opinion and official foreign policy in allied nations begin to shift. One major factor contributing to Israel's isolation is the intensification of its conflict with the Palestinians, particularly during military operations in Gaza. International reactions to civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and perceived disproportionate use of force have turned public sentiment sharply against Israel in many countries. Human rights organizations, including prominent Western-based ones, have accused Israel of violating international laws, and their reports have found traction with global audiences, influencing both grassroots activism and political discourse in parliaments and congresses. Judicial reforms proposed by Israel's government have also raised red flags abroad, especially among allies who value democratic norms and the rule of law. The perception that Israel is moving toward authoritarianism or diminishing the independence of its judiciary has unsettled long-standing partners who view democratic alignment as central to bilateral cooperation. This unease is amplified by political polarization and the presence of far-right elements within the Israeli government, which are often at odds with liberal democratic standards espoused by countries in Europe and North America. On the diplomatic front, several countries have begun to re-evaluate or cool their engagement with Israel. Some have postponed military deals, reduced diplomatic exchanges, or abstained from supporting Israel in international forums. At the United Nations, resolutions critical of Israel's actions are gaining more widespread support, while resistance to them from Western allies is weakening. Additionally, the normalization agreements through the Abraham Accords, once hailed as a breakthrough, have failed to expand significantly or solidify regional acceptance, particularly after renewed violence in the West Bank and Gaza. These developments, taken together, reflect a broader trend of Israel losing its traditional moral and political high ground. It is becoming increasingly isolated not through formal sanctions or open hostilities, but through subtle diplomatic distancing, global media criticism, and a changing narrative that questions the legitimacy of its actions and policies on the world stage. The fourth key note centers on the economic disruption and brain drain that are undermining Israel's long-term stability. Once celebrated as the start-up nation, Israel built a global reputation for its vibrant tech ecosystem, innovation in cybersecurity, medical technology, and artificial intelligence. Its economy thrived on the back of highly educated human capital, significant foreign direct investment, and deep integration with Western markets. However, the political turmoil, social unrest, and growing security threats have begun to erode the confidence of investors and the commitment of Israel's own brightest minds. The political instability marked by frequent elections, controversial judicial reforms, and internal division has directly impacted investor confidence. Major venture capital firms and multinational corporations that previously poured funds into Israel's tech sector are now expressing caution. Some have paused funding, while others have moved operations or reallocated resources to more stable environments. This economic hesitation is not just theoretical. Stock market dips, currency fluctuations, and declining foreign investment are now measurable indicators of shrinking financial trust. At the same time, many of Israel's most talented individuals in science, technology, and academia are seeking opportunities abroad. This brain drain, driven by disillusionment with government policies and fear for the future, is depriving the nation of the very people who have sustained its economic engine. Young professionals are increasingly looking to the United States, Canada, Germany, and other destinations that offer political stability, academic freedom, and greater personal security. This trend has been accelerating, especially since the outbreak of internal civil protests and concerns over democratic backsliding. In addition, military conflicts and security concerns have added to economic uncertainty. Tourism, a key revenue source, has been disrupted by repeated escalations in violence. Trade routes face potential threats from regional hostilities. Insurance costs for businesses and real estate have risen, reflecting a perceived risk premium. Companies that once saw Tel Aviv as a safe base of operations now explore alternatives in Europe and Asia. Moreover, economic inequality within Israel has deepened. While parts of the high-tech sector remain profitable, many citizens face rising living costs, wage stagnation, and housing shortages. This creates further dissatisfaction, especially among the younger generation, and fuels a desire to leave the country in search of better prospects. These economic disruptions, combined with the outward migration of intellectual talent, indicate a weakening of Israel's foundational strengths and raise questions about the long-term sustainability of its economic model. The fifth keynote highlights the erosion of social cohesion within Israel, a silent but deeply destructive force, weakening the state from within. Israel has always been a mosaic of communities, Jewish and Arab, religious and secular, Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, native-born and immigrant. In the past, this diversity was often framed as a strength, but today the cracks between these groups are deepening into fissures. The unity that once emerged in times of crisis is now being replaced by suspicion, resentment, and competing visions of the state's identity and future. One of the most glaring divides is between the ultra-Orthodox Haredi population and secular Israelis. The Haredim, who live by strict religious codes and often abstain from military service and full economic participation, rely heavily on state subsidies and political influence to maintain their communal autonomy. This has generated widespread frustration among secular Israelis who carry the burdens of military duty and tax responsibility. The resentment is not merely economic, it is cultural and ideological, with growing opposition to what many perceive as theocratic encroachment on public life. Simultaneously, tension between Jewish and Arab citizens within Israel has intensified. Despite formal citizenship, many Arab Israelis face systemic discrimination in housing, employment, education, and policing. Clashes in mixed cities such as Lod and Haifa, particularly during periods of broader regional conflict, have further polarized communities that once coexisted uneasily. Social trust is deteriorating and the shared civic space is shrinking. The perception among many Arab citizens that they are second-class residents, erodes any hope for long-term national unity. Ethnic divisions also play a role in the weakening of cohesion. Ashkenazi Jews, historically dominant in politics and business, are increasingly challenged by Mizrahi and Ethiopian Jews who feel marginalized and underrepresented. These groups, though part of the broader Jewish community, often feel excluded from the elite circles of influence and opportunity. The result is a society stratified not just by religion or nationality, but by ethnicity and class. In the midst of these divisions, political rhetoric has become more inflammatory. Leaders appeal to base instincts, pit communities against one another, and use identity as a weapon rather than a bridge. This makes reconciliation and collective action increasingly difficult. What emerges is a fragmented society where allegiance to subgroup identities outweighs national solidarity, weakening the internal fabric of the state and making it more vulnerable to external pressures and internal collapse. The sixth keynote centers on the rise of resistance alliances surrounding Israel, a development that has dramatically shifted the strategic balance in the region. Historically, Israel maintained a military and technological advantage over its neighbors, which deterred coordinated attacks and kept hostile entities fragmented. However, recent years have seen the emergence of a more unified front among Israel's adversaries, many of whom are supported, funded, or strategically guided by Iran. This network of proxy groups and regional partners has transformed from a loose collection of localized threats into a coordinated resistance axis, capable of sustained pressure and strategic assaults. Groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and various militias in Syria, Iraq and Yemen have significantly upgraded their operational capabilities. They now possess not just short-range rockets, but also precision-guided missiles, armed drones, tunnel systems, and cyber warfare tools. These groups have undergone training, logistics coordination, and intelligence sharing under Iranian oversight, turning them into more formidable and unpredictable adversaries. Their ability to conduct synchronized operations on multiple fronts has placed the Israeli military under unprecedented strain. What was once a manageable threat in a single theater has now become a multi-front security nightmare. Hezbollah alone is estimated to have over 150,000 rockets, many of which can reach deep into Israeli territory. Hamas has shown the ability to overwhelm Israeli air defenses with rocket barrages, while militias in Syria and Iraq are increasingly capable of launching cross-border attacks. Even the Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated a long-range strike capability that threatens not only Israeli targets, but also the broader stability of the Red Sea and the Gulf. This growing alliance is ideological as much as it is military. These groups view Israel as a common enemy and rally around the narrative of resistance to occupation and Western imperialism. Their coordination is not simply opportunistic, but rooted in shared objectives and strategic alignment. Unlike in previous decades, when Israel could exploit rivalries between its enemies, it now faces a more cohesive opposition that is both resilient and adaptable. These resistance alliances operate with the understanding that they do not need to defeat Israel in conventional war, but rather aim to wear it down over time, destabilize its economy, divide its society, and undermine its deterrence credibility. This persistent and decentralized form of warfare presents a complex and enduring challenge that Israel has yet to fully counter, signaling a fundamental shift in the region's strategic dynamics. What we have witnessed is not merely a collection of isolated problems, but the slow unraveling of a state once thought unshakable. From internal political fragmentation to exposed military vulnerabilities, from rising international isolation to economic instability and intellectual flight, from deep social division to the coordinated rise of regional resistance, each factor alone is a challenge, but together they represent a seismic shift. The collapse of Israel, as dramatic as that sounds, is not happening through a single moment of destruction, but through a steady and undeniable erosion from within and without. It is a transformation marked not by sudden explosions, but by accumulating fractures across every layer of society, state, and strategy. History rarely announces its turning points in loud declarations. It whispers them through patterns we often fail to see until it is too late. And now, those patterns are becoming clear. Thank you for joining me on this journey of analysis and reflection. May your search for truth continue with clarity and courage. Good luck as you seek understanding in a world growing more complex by the day. Stay thoughtful, stay informed, and thank you for listening.